Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by the Riverview Hospital in Wisconsin Rapids and Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320, as well as the web at WFHR.com, and we also welcome our friends from River Cities Media, Jesse to be precise, who are here digitally recording our conversation with Wood County Board Chairman Lance Pliml in the first half hour of today's show. Good morning, Lance.
Good morning, Carl. Hey, I'm happy to hear that 70 to 80 above zero.
That's right. Yes.
Which we haven't heard much of.
I'm happy with the warmer weather, and then we got a few days to dry out before more rain comes in. But the summertime is here in many ways. Rafters didn't get off to a good start, but you had a big crowd, and it's another attraction in Wood County. Had the parks filled during the holiday weekend. I took a little drive around the Lake Wazich area, and every place was packed. It looked like everybody was having a good time.
Absolutely. I was at the game last night, and they're always fun. I encourage attendance. It's a great event. It's a fun, affordable family evening, and from a county perspective, going back to the parks, we really did have good crowds this weekend, but we had almost perfect weather the entire weekend. Wasn't too hot, wasn't too cool. I was out at the park on Friday at Lake Wazich, South Park, and the trailers and motorhomes were rolling in almost bumper to bumper from 3 o'clock in the afternoon on. So good crowds everywhere. You know, that generates revenue not only in our parks but around town because those people eat out, they buy gas. That's a very important part of our economy. Yeah,
and so it was good to see all the visitors. And was over at Barron for a fish fry at Anchor Bay on Friday night, and that place was packed, and all the seasonal cottages, not the permanent homes, but the seasonal cottages were all reopening, and people were arriving and making connections with their neighbors and finding out what happened during the winter.
Yeah, sometimes it gets frustrating, when you have those dinner waits wherever you are. But we are a tourism destination, and I really want people to take a minute and think about how that drives the economy sometimes.
That's right.
Sit down, have a pop, or beverage, and relax, enjoy it, meet some of those people, say hi, and we're lucky that we have them up here.
That's right. Now, when it comes to county business, let's see. We've been talking about the facilities of Wood County, the long-term facility study going on. Anything new on that?
That is part of a very large discussion, and it's probably one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that we have. We are trying to look at where we are going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I think when people built that courthouse back in the 50s, they probably figured that would be the end of it and we'd be done forever. But as times change and needs change, we need to, at times, expand some operations, contract others. But we certainly didn't have even the thought on the horizon that we would have the information highway that we have today. And some of those buildings, it's almost impossible to run fiber and other communication aspects into those buildings. We've certainly seen a growth in the human services area over the years. We have much higher demands on our sheriff's department and corrections. Safety has become a concern that we never had back in the 50s, and we need to address those issues going forward. So we started it's been more than a year ago, with a study to see what it is we would need if we had a wish list. And we put that together, and now we're in the phase of how would we implement the most needed of those changes as most affordably as possible.
Okay.
So, with anything we do, and I come from a business background, it's, what is that return on investment? How do we get the most bang for our buck? And then the attitude that, I'm sure that not only myself but most of the board has is, if it were my own business, what would I do, not only now but looking to the future? And that plays into that space needs. Are we going to expand at the courthouse site? Would we build somewhere else? Is it more economical to buy another building somewhere? How do we address those security needs? And then as we prioritize that, how does all that fit in with the need to replace aging infrastructure from a highway perspective?
Right.
And some of those. And I know as well as anybody, there's a limited amount of dollars available. But I also know that if you don't update the infrastructure and have that in place, you will see a constant erosion of the business community. So we have to stay up to date on roads, communication, and those ancillary services. So we're addressing all those right now, and you probably have a million questions that relate to those.
Well, you mentioned highways. Of course, Wood County was one of the leaders in encouraging the development, but also regulating the frac sand mining. But that leads into what will be the long-term consequences of the roads in the frac sand mining area, and is that going to be a costly proposition down the road?
There's a delicate balance between encouraging business development and protecting infrastructure. From a frac sand perspective and that infrastructure, at least at the county, and I would even go as far as say at the state level, those state roads, we're in pretty good shape and we're protected. Those agreements we put into place with those companies handle the maintenance and hopefully replacement someday of those roads that they impact. But that doesn't address the other 320 miles of county highway that's out there. And years ago when they built those highways, they often built them just on the sand that was there. They took the topsoil off, oftentimes buried the spoil right under the roadway, which caused problems as that stuff decayed over years, put a road down and hoped it would handle it. And in today's world of heavier trucks in all aspects, more cars, just more traffic, we have an infrastructure that is starting to crumble in that respect. We have about a replacement schedule of our roads right now based on available dollars of about a 40-year rotation to get that done. And those roads don't, to make this very simple and not talk about pacer ratings and some of these other things, those roads last about 20 years. And it doesn't take long to figure out that if you're replacing roads at a 40-year interval and they only last 20, it doesn't take too long before you have a real crumbling infrastructure. So one of the things that we're looking at, not only with the space needs implementation, but with our roads, is kind of a whole new way of doing business. And that is, do we bond for some of these projects? Do we borrow some of that money up front while money is cheap right now? It allows us to leverage some additional state and federal funding.
Sure.
And replace some of that at a little faster rate than we would otherwise be able to. Now that's a totally different way of doing business. In the past we have funded everything we have done every single year out of available funds. There's the thought that, if it's a capital expenditure and we're looking at building things that last 30 to 50 years, we should take that debt out for a number of years. But we have never done that. And if we do, it will impact the tax rate somewhere. And I know we've had a board, and I have sat on it for the last 16 years, where we have not increased the county tax levy at all. Zero. Nothing. If we do some of these projects, if we accelerate those schedules, there would be some impact to the tax levy. My concern is if we don't do some of it, we're going to see a much more rapid deterioration than we might have, and then we don't have the opportunity to garner some of those businesses and other opportunities that might come.
What main roads are we talking about? Which ones are you most concerned about?
I would say it's all county highways. I mean, we've had some we've reconstructed. I'll give you an example. We've had some that we reconstructed fairly recently. County A comes to mind.
Okay.
That we thought we had done, pretty much for the next 20, 25 years. But when you look at the traffic pattern shift, that's occurred with the reroute of Highway 13 and 34, the 7380 routes, people cutting across A into Marshfield because that takes you right onto the Veterans Parkway. That road is already seeing significant need for improvement. Some of it we can handle with maintenance, and sometimes if we accelerate that maintenance schedule, if we do crack filling and overlays and some of those things, we can extend the life of a road for another 10, 20 years. But if we don't get at that maintenance on a regular basis, then those deteriorate very quickly. We also have a concern with bridges, as you get around. And you've seen that in the country. You saw that with the tragic collapse of I think that was the I-35 bridge, into Minnesota.
Right.
We certainly don't want that to happen with any of our bridges. Although much smaller, they still need replacement. And we currently do not have a maintenance schedule that would allow us to handle that as quickly as it's happening. So my guess is we will probably look at bonding some additional dollars to take care of some of those infrastructure needs. We can do some of that with no increase to the tax levy because it's handled differently in how those financial infrastructure is set up. But at some point, with enough borrowing, it adds to the tax levy. And then what's palatable? What do you as a taxpayer, or what are you as a taxpayer willing to stomach? Are you willing to have an additional $10 tacked onto your tax bill a year? Are you willing to have an additional 20 or 30? And then that factors into what are the towns doing and what are the school districts doing. And,
Yeah.
and at some point, I kind of get tired of hearing it's only a couple of bucks. But it's only a couple of bucks for everything every single year. And at the end of the day, if you own a fair amount of property, because most of our revenues that are generated through property tax assessments or collections. Even a small increase can impact a family to the tune of a couple hundred, $200, $300, $400 a year, and
that can hurt.
Those are dollars that come out of your discretionary spending. It might be that vacation you'd planned on taking. Those are the tough decisions. The easy ones are, I've said it a million times. There's a hole out on County F. Send a truck out and fill it up. That's pretty simple. When you talk about spending $10, $15, $20 million, that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, and then you got the state trying to figure out long-term how it's going to finance highway road projects in the state. I mean, they've got a study going on right now, the Walker administration has, of trying to figure out something that's palatable for everybody.
And that's been the big problem for us. County government is an administrative arm of state government. And every time they want to fill a hole at the state level, they just pass the cost along to the county, in effect take it out of their budget and say, hey, we're good, and kind of wash their hands of it. And we've had pretty good cooperation lately, but at the end of the day, that's kind of the game that gets played. And transportation funding, for instance, has been cut significantly over the years. We saw a little increase last year, but if you look at where it's gone over the last number of years, that's been cut. There's legislation pending, that would make those transportation funds, a protected fund that can't be rated for other issues. My take then is they just appropriate less dollars there, or they do something differently, if they can't shift it. But we need to do something different, and I have the privilege of sitting on the Local Government Institute board. We meet with the leaders from the towns, villages, cities, municipalities around the state. There's about 8 of us. And it's a think tank type situation where we sit down and we talk about these larger issues. One of those right now is transportation funding, and I think it's June 5th, if I'm correct. I'm looking into next week already. But we're sitting down with the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. We have funded a study that's gone on for about 6 or 7 months to look at how we handle this. How do we fill or backfill that shortfall? Open road tolling at the state level probably is going to end up being at the top of that list. That allows us to collect some of those funds for that infrastructure, especially in the southern and southeast part of the state, from non-residents of the state, which
Right.
probably makes some sense. And if you look at the money that we've thrown into the zoo interchange and some of the construction projects in Milwaukee, that dwarfs the amount of dollars spent in the entirety of the rest of the state. So those are one of the things we're looking at. If we talk about increase in gas tax or mileage taxes, that would greatly impact the rural areas. It would hurt us. There's people in the cities who don't realize that you actually have to get in a car and drive 20 miles to work.
Right.
They just can't fathom that because they've really never been off of asphalt. And those are the conversations we often have with those people in Washington. You've never been outside the Beltway. Why don't you come to Wisconsin and take a look? Our representatives understand that, but there's only a handful of those. You got 8 or 10 of those, and you got a Congress, between the representatives and senators of almost 600. They don't carry the day
Right.
when those type of funding issues come in. But there are needs to put people in cars, to have good highways, to get them to jobs. They forget sometimes, I think, that we produce the milk, we grow the crops, and we do all the things that they eat and need in those cities. And yet they think we can hop on a bus or jump in a cab anytime we want to go somewhere.
Yeah, a rural area is a lot different than an urban area where you can have a urban bus system or a train system or what have you. When you're up here, there's a lot of countryside between cities.
Carl, we've looked at all those. We've had meetings. We've tried to develop bus routes, regular routing and schedules to both Marshfield and Stevens Point, Wausau, and some of the surrounding areas. It's not financially feasible. When we do the modeling, we just don't have enough people at set times that want to go to certain places. Or we have jobs that start at so many different times that, taking mass transit doesn't work real well. So we have to look at workarounds. Obviously carpooling helps if you're an individual out there. If you could split the cost among 2, 3, 4 people, that helps greatly. But at the end of the day, most of the time, you don't just jump on a bus here or jump on the train
No.
and get to work.
And then you mentioned the internet or the infrastructure for technological infrastructure. I mean, it's rapidly changing. And how are you going to be able to anticipate that as you do projects to either remodel the courthouse or build a new facility somewhere or purchase other facilities? I mean, that is going to be a huge issue.
Well, I think if everybody's sitting at home listening, when was the first time you had a desktop computer at your house? For most of you, it was probably late 80s, maybe early 90s. And I don't think anybody anticipated that at that time that you would be sitting there now with a laptop or a smartphone and doing all your work, or sitting there with your iPad. Back then, we didn't even anticipate, microwave links, fiber optic, cable, and all of those things that we need to transmit data. You try to have a crystal ball and you try to think ahead, but realistically, when I sit here today, I'm thinking, what don't we have right now that we will have in 20 years that makes fiber obsolete? I just don't know. I think if you look back, and you don't have to look back very far in history to realize we never anticipated those kind of leaps in technology. I'm not sure what will happen down the road. I'm sure someday somebody, completely out of what's even imaginable, will figure out a way to transmit data by using hydrogen or oxygen or something else.
Our brain waves.
Where there's no infrastructure involved. We don't know, but we're trying to make those best guesses right now, because a microwave link is exceptionally expensive, and you have to have towers to put them on. And we did a tower project a couple of years ago. It cost us $1 million to put a couple of those up. That impacts tax levy. Yet if you call for a fire truck, a police officer, an ambulance, you'd kind of like to know that they get there. So we consider that pretty important. And then we might not use as much paper today, or at least that's what they tell me, although I tend to print a lot of it. But if you look at the amount of data you get, I bet if I pulled my phone out of my pocket, I can't do that because I actually left it in the car so it wouldn't ring, but I would venture a guess that since 8 o'clock this morning till right now, I probably have somewhere between 50 and 100 emails that I've received in that period of time.
On my laptop in my office, I've probably got about the same.
So the amount of data out there and how that's handled, and to have that capacity, and then to secure that data, is a whole nother issue. And it runs into the millions of dollars, and then we're usually required by the government to archive all of that data, which creates storage issues. And and how do you handle that? And do you do it on site? Do you do it off site? How do you back it up? Tremendous costs. We got to figure it out.
So what's the timeline for all these studies?
Well, the nice part is we're not on a strict timeline. The nice part is I can tell you right now, from a jail perspective, one of the things you've heard out there is we've talked about additions to the courthouse, which would include an addition to the jail.
Right.
We're set for the next 10 years. We have nothing that we have to do for the next 10 years. We've had tremendous cooperation through our judicial system. Our judges have been very progressive. Our sheriff's department under Sheriff Reichert and their people, whether it's use of electronic monitoring, some of the other alternatives to incarceration, our drug court, adult drug treatment court, in our contracts with Wapaka County, we're set from a jail perspective for 10 years. Now, we're starting to look at what do we do past 10 or 15, but we're good there. So that need is probably addressed. And in most cases, that's sometimes the most pressing within a county. We can probably get by today with what we have, even for the next year or 2 or 3. But you have to start planning, because the time you install the infrastructure, whether it's sewer lines, electrical, power, all those other things, you're going to be 2, 3, 4 years out. So I think that we need to get something done within the next 3 years. But that would not include the entire $50 million price tag that's been put on some of these things if we went to full construction.
Okay. And speaking of construction, if you've been around the Wood County Courthouse area here in Wisconsin Rapids, there's a lot of construction going on.
That was really brought to bear the other day. On Friday, there was a Memorial Day service at the courthouse.
Right.
And parking is at a premium down there right now, because as the city installs the new roundabout down there, it's impacted traffic on Baker Street, on Avon, on Market Street. So parking is limited, access is limited right now, and it's difficult. But the reason I wanted to mention that, it really became a concern on that day because we know we have a lot of the public in. And I want to thank those veterans for their service, both those who have served and those who are considering serving in the future, those young men and women that are still in school. without their service, without their sacrifice, without those commitments, I don't get to sit here and talk about our government.
Same here.
At all. So, it's with great and deep appreciation that I really say thank you. And then the other thing, it amazes me. I've been sitting here the last couple of nights and I've watched the History Channel special on the World Wars, and I don't know if anybody else has been watching that. But it should be mandatory for every single young person in junior high and high school to watch that more than once because, war is hell. I don't know if I can really say it.
No,
but it is. It's unbelievable. And the way they fought at the times they did in World War I and World War II, in the trenches, eye to eye, is significantly different than we do today. The lack of communication, where they didn't talk to loved ones or family for months at a time, and you might receive a letter, as opposed to today where I'm not diminishing commitment, but you can get on oftentimes, you can Skype or FaceTime or something else,
right.
and you're not there. It's not the same, and I understand that, but you might at least have some connection you can see. So when we have those honor flights, when you have the chance to thank those veterans, when you see them around town, I just can't encourage you enough to say thank you.
Yeah, I have a habit of saying thank you to any military personnel or any veteran that I see. And I also say that to our other public safety officials who put their necks on the line for us to keep our communities safe. Our police, our firefighters, the people that have some really tough jobs at times, and we take them for granted.
And the other part of that, I'm digressing a little bit from county stuff, but like I said, the counties, the states, the federal government wouldn't be here without the support that we had there. We would be part of a different nation. But that really, truly was the greatest generation. When you look at the sacrifices, when you look at the number that were, killed or wounded, it's unbelievable. And I cannot believe, even as I sit there talking about this with some of the young people I know that had no idea, and it just amazes me, no idea of what went on until they started to watch some of this programming. And I'm thinking, why aren't we educating people to see that history will repeat itself? And as I sit there every day, I say, this is exactly what's happening over in fill in the blank.
Yeah.
It's happened more than once. And if you watch this, you're looking back. This is only, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. It's not ancient history, and it's on film. So I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to take a look at it. It's ongoing, and it's been rerun several times.
A final thought as we go forward. How is the county's budget looking going through the rest of the year? Because we're hearing about the state's condition, how is that affecting the county?
Well, I think we're, with any unforeseen huge emergency, I think we're probably in pretty good shape this year.
Okay.
And I think that we probably are in pretty good shape next year. And that's one of the reasons we're looking at some of these projects. Okay. Our county has a borrowing capacity, I believe, in excess of $250 million. And our total debt is probably right now in the neighborhood of $2 million. And that will be paid off basically the end of this year. So we are a county that's been extremely well run from a fiscal standpoint. We've been extremely conservative in how we've handled that. So I think we're in good shape. We're sitting down right now looking at capital improvement budgets and how those would relate to everything. Because we talked about highways. How would that relate to space needs? How does that relate to additional needs in the human service aspect or in public safety? So we got to prioritize all of that. But I think going forward, we're probably in pretty good shape. But we're just starting the process. I'll have a much better snapshot of that come late June and early July when we really roll up our sleeves and get at it.
Okay. Well, we had an interesting discussion this morning. I look forward to our next visit next month.
I do too.
Okay. Well, have a good rest of the weekend, a great weekend, and let's hope it's a profitable summer for everybody in Wood County.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it.
Take care. Wood County Board Chairman Lance Pliml, wrapping up part one of today's edition of the Morning Magazine. As always, it's brought to you by Riverview Medical Center. With you, it's personal and comfort air.